Hi everyone, this is Sierra Bellinger and welcome to my curriculum design for FES 430. The main goals of my curriculum are to inspire students to ask questions rather than just taking information they receive at face value. There's oftentimes room for improvement, and sometimes information you get isn't even accurate. So if our students are growing up not questioning information they hear, then well, that could cause some problems in future generations. So just get them thinking, get them asking, well, why is it like this? Or could it be better? Or could it be worse? Either way. The other main goal is to think about forest disturbance and succession, how disturbances can be good and bad, what their effects can be, and how the recovery process can take place. This curriculum is designed for middle schoolers, 6th through 8th graders. These students are in the formal operational stage, and they are some of them are beginning to think abstractly. Some of them have been thinking abstractly for a year or two now. But the main point is they're beginning to be able to assess things without actually seeing them. And they use internal processing methods, which will be very beneficial for these courses. The learning theories that we are focusing on using are the situated learning theory and the experiential learning theory. The situated learning theory comes into play because it just emphasizes how important the context of learning is. It can be very difficult to learn about a forest if you are in a classroom, whereas if you're wanting to learn about a forest, if you're in a forest, it could probably be a little easier. And experiential learning theory is also a big one for this because it kind of focuses on how there are steps to a process, and we will definitely be using steps for these lessons. The learning outcomes and objectives for the first round of lessons, they will be language arts based. Students will be able to collect and record observations in a notebook or journal. They will also be able to describe their observations in writing. Additionally, we want them to be able to explain their viewpoints in writing, make predictions about situations, and argue effectively in writing. For the science lessons, we want students to be able to list the steps of the scientific method, explain the steps, like the different steps of the scientific method, design an experiment using the scientific method, and then at the end of the last lesson, they should be able to state the law of conservation of mass, as well as explain it and give examples of how it works. Next, assessment of evidence. For the language arts lesson, there will be 2 essays, 1 essay for each lesson. They don't have to be very long. One should be a narrative, and one will be a argumentative paper. The narrative, the assessment of evidence, comes from how well students were able to describe observations they made. It's a creative writing paper, so really there's a lot of freedom. And just try to monitor or try to observe if there is a sense of logical progression. The argumentative paper, it's important to know that assessment of evidence is not based on whether or not students are factually accurate. This isn't a research-based project, it's an opinion-based piece, so you don't want to go in and say, well, your paper's great, you argued well, but you aren't accurate, so no points. That's not what we want. We want, did you argue well? Did you back up your opinion with evidence and facts, or observations more than facts? For the science lessons, assessment of evidence will come in 2 different forms. For the scientific method lesson, students will be placed into groups and they will give presentations. These presentations will consist of experiments that they've designed. They don't have to actually concoct the experiments, but experiments they've designed to answer a question, and just whether or not they're able to list the steps of the scientific method, and then whether or not they're able to use them effectively. The last assessment of evidence for the final lesson is just a quiz that they can take when they get back to class, or even while they're still in the forest if there's time. It will just ask them to state the law of conservation of mass as well as give an example. You can tell that they've learned something if they are able to state it effectively. In their own words is fine. Additionally, there's the cycle that they provide. It can be written, it can be pictures, but it should give the idea that they have an understanding of what it means. The first lesson, the creative writing lesson, will ask students to just kind of walk through the trail and make observations. This will be the first lesson. It'll get the blood flowing. It'll get them kind of thinking and ready to write. It will ask that they find a location that looks like it could be a home for some sort of community, any kind of community. It could be carpenter ants, it could be possums or squirrels. It could also be imaginative creatures like fairies and trolls. It doesn't matter. It's a creative writing paper. So make sure they know that they have some wiggle room. They'll just be asked to respond to a prompt that it tells them to come up with their community and identify its members and what they do, and then have them think of a disturbance that could occur. Any kind. It could be human-based, it could be a fire, it could be a flood, and have them think about how their community responds. Are they able to survive? Are they able to rebuild? Do they have to move? What happens? And that paper does not have to be completed on site. I would say it probably needs to be due about a week later. But make sure that they have ample time to brainstorm. Additionally, with the next language arts lesson, it is an argumentative piece. Once they've kind of gotten started and they're ready to go, switch gears and head over to the argumentative paper. This paper will ask students to think about what kind of forest disturbances there are and which is the worst in their opinion. That's the important piece. Probably the most important piece is it is in their opinion. It is not which one do you think it is, and if you're wrong, then, well, you're wrong and you won't get a good grade. What they need to do is practice using critical thinking skills and really decide for themselves what the worst type of disturbance is. Again, this paper is not due. They do not have to complete it on site. About a week later would be fine, but I don't want them to have too much time because I don't want this isn't designed to be a research piece. We don't want them to go home and start researching. We do want them to fine-tune their papers, make sure grammatically everything is right and their sentence structure works and their flow makes sense, but they don't need to start researching. This is solely based on opinion, and research could take them in a completely different direction, which could just create a lot more work. Moving on to the science lessons. The first science lesson is about the scientific method, and it asks, before beginning, go over the steps of the scientific method with your students. Many of them are probably going to be familiar with it already, which is great. And then break them into groups. Students should kind of look through the forest trail and think about what kind of questions they have. Make observations and ask questions. So, like, why does this tree appear to be burned around the base? What does that mean? Why are there multiple trees growing together in a line with exposed roots? Are they on a nurse log? What happened here? Other observations could be like, how many people are on the trail? Why? Do we want more people on the trail? Is this an optimum amount? It can be anything, really. And once they've split into their groups and come up with an observation, have them kind of work together to craft an experiment using the steps of the scientific method. I would suggest that, if there's time and they're ready, you can have groups present their experiments on location. Otherwise, probably over the next few days in class would be fine too. The last lesson touches on the law of conservation of mass, and This one is probably the most basic of all. Students don't need anything. There's no paper or pencil required. You're simply going to gather your students in a clearing and talk about how energy or mass cannot be created or destroyed in a chemical reaction. It touches on chemistry, which your students may or may not be familiar with, but probably not much. And it's a great way to just see how things kind of cycle through a forest system. You'll have students kind of pick things up to find a pine cone or a stick and talk to them, what do you think is going to happen to this if it just stays on the ground? Eventually, will it turn into soil? Will it be picked up and used somewhere else? Just because it's gone, does that mean it was destroyed? Or does that mean its mass was just sort of transferred into another type of object? And then after you're done with that, students can take a quiz and state the law of conservation of mass, as well as give an example. This can be drawn or written. Drawing might be a little bit more fun, just kind of show a cycle of how energy can be transferred. And that is my curriculum. Thank you for watching, and it's been a really great term. And I'm sorry I touched my hair and my face so much in the video. Bye!